friends. I'm Sally Clarkson, and I am speaking to you today from Monument, Colorado. And what a privilege it is to be a part of what this wonderful organization, Anselm Society, is doing. My family has been a part of this, and we love the work, the conferences, the ways that we've seen it grow over the past number of years. And I'm just so honored to be able to share a little bit of my message with you today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am an author. I just completed my 21st book. I have 4 children, Sarah, Joel, Nathan, and Joy, and I will be telling you about them in just a little bit. But I particularly love this whole subject that all of us are addressing through our own little videos this week, because I think that it is through using an imagination, through redeeming your imagination, that you can actually picture the hidden beauty, the depths of the world, the transcendence of our God who created us and our world. And it happens that even in the midst of this, one of my books that will be coming out in August is really about imagination. It's called Awakening Wonder. And I'm going to show you this picture because I do love the arts. I love artists. Maybe I can get a little bit closer, but I wanted to have, this is going to be my book cover. It is a family sitting in the night sky, underneath the night sky, observing the constellations and the stars and the beauty of the night sky. And I was trying to write a book that I thought with this kind of cover that would help elucidate in the minds of so many people, what does it actually mean to awaken the wonder that is dormant within us? The children are born asking questions. We are born with the capacity to have rigorous mental muscle so that we can have a robust imagination and thought and wonder. And I wrote the book because as a speaker, I have been speaking all over the world in many venues, but in the past few years, after I would speak, I would have people who would line up and talk to me for literally sometimes hours, sometimes 10 hours at a time. And they would all ask the same question. How did you awaken wonder? How did you transform the minds and hearts of your children? Because we're following them now. And we want to know how you did it. And they wanted a formula. They wanted me to have some kind of a reductive set of rules or principles that I used in my home. But I'm going to tell each of you right now that, at least in my experience, because each of us is made with a unique personality, with a unique story as a background to our lives, and with unique drives, we can conduct the beauty and the creativity and the dimension of color, sound, taste, feel, words in our own homes within the confines of our own limitations and personality. And so to tell you about why people were asking me, I have my daughter Sarah is 36 and she lives in the UK in South England. And she has 2 little children, and Lillian and Samuel, and lives with her husband Thomas, who is an Anglican priest. And she's a writer, and she graduated from Oxford with her master's and loves to write, journal, teach about these whole issues. And then there is Joel, who is living in St. Andrews. He's finishing his PhD in the imagination of the arts, and particularly in the area of music, because he went to Berklee College of Music and got his undergraduate degree and has been pursuing composing in film scores and in his own original music, as well as now choral music. And he's teaching and recording lots of music in St. Andrews. And then there's Nathan, who is my second son, who lives in New York City and between New York City and LA. And he is both a script writer, an actor, a movie producer, as well as an author. He has a new book coming out soon called Good Man. But Nathan's imagination was captured by stories, captivated by the idea of being a hero in his own story and lifetime. And so he's still producing stories on film and in books. And then there's Joy. And Joy is living also in St. Andrews. She's about to finish her PhD right now. She has an amazing podcast called Speaking with Joy about the arts, about literature, music, and different pieces that should capture our imagination. And she also teaches in St. Andrews. And so as people started seeing my own children have arenas of influence, they said, "What did you do?" Because I think that all of us desire to grow into the fullness of the personality and the life and the possibility that God has created us to have. And it was just such a privilege for Clay and me. I'm sitting in my husband Clay's library, and many of you know Clay. He's a musician and a writer and also a speaker. And so we dreamed when we were very young and when we became parents of how can we pass on not just, again, a reductive, prescriptive sort of faith to our children where they live by moral codes and they learn what is right and what is wrong, but we desire to pass on to them that mysterious understanding of Christ, to taste and see that He is good, to imagine music and songs, to become acquainted with the ways He created nature, and to become partakers in the vast variety and texture and dimension of food and color, and to look at creation with the animals and with the atoms and with the way that the world was put together in a mathematical way so that we can see the scope and sequence and we can observe the order. And we wanted our children to know that, as Lewis wrote about, that God was wild and beyond our own ability to contain Him with just a few words or with just a very small sort of philosophy. But we wanted them to know His love and His goodness and His beauty and His endless capacity to create and to love and to do, and then to enter into that imagination in order to fulfill the story that He's created them to fulfill. So I just thought I'm just going to very shortly talk about what are some of the keys, elements that I think help create a home or a place where imagination can be redeemed and restored. And so to start off with, I'm going to give you just a very short outline, and it's going to be based on life. How do you bring to life this kind of a creative power, this energy inside of the walls of your home, in the midst of the mundane, in the midst of the everyday, in such a way that imagination and awakening that wonder can be restored? And so the first thing that I realized, I was actually a missionary in Eastern Europe when it was still communist, and I worked in Romania and Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Poland, and we had to imagine in our minds, what would it take for us to leave an influence on the lives of the people that we were meeting with in case we were kicked out of the country, that they would love God and understand and know Him or seek Him the rest of their lives. So I cut my teeth on an understanding of what mentoring was, discipleship. When we look at mentoring throughout all of history, especially church history, but just history in general, we see that there was mentoring going on between Plato and Socrates, and Helen Keller was mentored by Annie Sullivan so that she lived into her full capacity. We see mentoring amongst the Inklings with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and all of that group. And so because I loved that and I loved the discipleship of Christ, I realized that I needed to be fully engaged and live into my own capacity to such an extent that when my children, my friends, my husband drew from my soul, that they would be drawing what I wanted to give away, that they would be drawing from the intellect, the creativity, the messages, the love that I had invested there. Jesus said that the student will be like his teacher. And so I think the first part of becoming somebody who redeems creation, redeems artistic uh, design and creativity in their own worlds, requires for us to say, what are my goals? What do I want to do? To read people who inspire us, to make a goal of what kinds of activities we're going to be involved in that will help us to grow in our capacity to be creative, to be excellent, to understand concepts. And so as a young woman, I knew this principle that I wanted to walk alongside to become, you could say, a coach, a teacher, a mentor, a cheerleader, a conductor of the creativity and beauty and goodness that I wanted my children to understand and imagine. I knew that I needed to store this up. So I sought out books and I would go to conferences. I did all sorts of things to build up my own legacy of words so that in the day in, day out walls of our home, we would be talking together about, we'd go out and watch a sunset, and I would say, can you imagine that the God who threw the stars into place created such color that we could enjoy every day? Look at that sunset, or listen to that bird. Or can you imagine that every snowflake, and we would look at them through books and through different science videos, can you imagine that every single snowflake is a work of art? And so as it was the narration of life in every day that came from my own dedication as one of my life goals to pursue excellence in understanding the creative and understanding the wide realm that God had given us in this world. So the first point I want to make is that you need to picture yourself as a person who has a treasure chest, so to speak, in your own heart, where you are storing up beauty and goodness and wisdom and inspiration so that others may draw from what you have stored up in your life. Now, I'm going to start out with the word L for LIFE, but I'm going to give you 3 L's. And the first thing that I think someone who wants to help others redeem their imagination and restore it is that we have to learn what it means to be lovers of people. I really have come to believe, as I've studied scripture and also just in my lifetime, that when we exercise love, when we spend time, give attention, it always takes time to communicate love. When we take the time to lay a foundation of affirmation and acceptance and understanding for the lives of those who we want to influence and who we want that while they're in the midst of our home, they can experience that wonder, that imagination. They can ask questions. Love is the foundation for the best kind of influence when it comes to us being able to spread the thoughts that we have stored up in our hearts. So loving as a person, learning how to give affection, learning how to narrate forward words. That was such a beautiful song. I wonder if your music is going to change the world. I love the fact that you created such an amazing narration of St. George and the Dragon. You've got such strength of mind and heart. I can't wait to see the story that you're going to tell with your life. One time, and it actually had to do with this picture. This picture is about a story in our own lives where one evening, it was the most beautiful evening in Colorado here, and I wanted to make a memory for all of us to be exposed to the heavenlies in a special way, because we lived in a little house that was backing up to the National Forest, 7,200 feet high, And it was a particularly beautiful night. It was clear, and the stars were out, and you could see the Milky Way clearly, and the pine trees were lightly blowing. And so I called everyone and I said, we're going to sleep out on the deck tonight. And so everyone scrambled and brought their sleeping bags, and we put on some Celtic music that was wafting in the background, and I snuggled up my little 4-year-old, Joy, who is the one getting her PhD now. And so we watched as we saw shooting stars. We watched the night sky change. We were all mesmerized by the grandness of the sky out in the country, up in a clear night. And I didn't have to lecture anyone and say, pay attention, this is what stars are like, or notice the colors of the stars. But every one of us, within the confines of our own personalities, were living into this beautiful creation and an evening of grandeur in such a way that all of us engaged our imaginations, because we were created to be those people who engage and who question and who love and who worship. And so as we were sitting there, I was holding on to little Joy, and I said, you know, Joy, I'm just amazed that I get to be your mama. And you're an amazing child. As a matter of fact, you see how God threw the stars all across our sky? Aren't they beautiful? And what colors do we see? And they're sparkling. And we'll read about the stars tomorrow. But I think in the same way that God manifested his very personality, because he is a beautiful God, that he has made you to be a beautiful girl. And I think you're going to spread beauty in your lifetime. I just love being your mama. Well, it just happened that the next week I found Joy in her little old tattered ballet costume, and she had a bottle of bubbles, and she was running back and forth across our deck for quite a while. And when she came back to me, she said, Mama, when you hold me and when you love me like that, it just makes something sparkle inside of me, Mama. And she said, I was thinking that in the same way that God put beauty into our world, that if I blew my bubbles into the world, I would be bringing beauty like he did. And so that was, I've seen so many times that when I could take the time to love and extend grace and words of affirmation to my children, their imaginations were set free in a different way to become who they were. Which brings me to the second L, and that is the liberty. To liberate your people. Look for different personalities. Allow people to be extroverts, introverts. Allow them to be interested in animals or stories or music or art. I think because most of us have thought of education as a system where people sit in rows and they learn to be quiet, and they learn not to ask questions, they learn not to make too much disruption in a classroom, that really tends to bring into the thinking patterns of our own minds that there's only one right answer, there's only one kind of personality. And so from the beginning, we kind of realized that since every person has their own fingerprint, that they also have their own personality print. And so we would talk with them, and we would even pray in the power of the Holy Spirit, who might you have created this person to be, and what capacity might they have to bring your light and beauty and goodness to the world? And so we did. We had musicians, we had writers, we had artists, we had designers, we had extroverts, introverts. But we tried to imagine inside their heart what their desires were, and then we tried to provide a place where they could be free to experiment, to question, to enjoy, to live life in a way that they would feel affirmed for who they were. And then I think that for us to understand that life comes through loving and through liberty. I'm going to move on to my second point, but if you can think about that as a person who mentors other people, that whole giving of yourself to love and giving of yourself to affirm the uniqueness of each person, that's an important starting point to giving life to creativity in your home, um, and to imagination. The second thing I want to talk about is L-I. I is inspiration and imagination. And this is the place where I want to talk about what it looks like to be a person who supplies resources for imagination. You can see behind me here, you just can't see my own library, but we literally collected hundreds of books, art books, and we would put them on easels all over our house. We have a favorite one called Noah's Ark that was painted by a Dutch painter who imagined all of the different animals and creation and people and the spots and the stripes and the tall giraffe and the tiny little fish. And it's a beautiful book, but we would say, oh my goodness, look at the imagination of God. What would you have created? Would you have created something like fish in water? Or would you have created a dragon? Or what would you have created? So we provided resources. Every day we provided resources for our children. And we provided lots of stories about heroes. And I remember my son Nathan, who is the filmmaker, was particularly captivated by hero tales. And we had been reading about people in history and people in scripture and people, we studied artists and musicians who had left an imprint in the world. And so Nathan came to me one day and he said, Mom, he said, I know who I want to be like when I grow up. And I said, well, who? I can't wait to hear. And he said, I want to be like Superman. And I said, well, tell me why. And he said, well, Superman came from a foreign place, but he came to the world to help people and to save them from darkness. And he said, I want to be a hero in my own story someday. And so Nathan, after reading hero tales, and even it was funny because that day was when Superman captivated his imagination. But we were just doing a podcast actually together today on his new book coming out on next week on Good Man. And he said, I feel like so many people think that faith is passed on by principles of good and bad, of cognitive understanding, of moralism. But he said, I really want to help men in this generation to understand that they were created to be warriors of light, that they were created to be heroes in their story, that they were created in a very secular world to bring in self-sacrifice, personal love, imagination, the giving of a great intellect, the living of a holy life set apart for the story of God. And so he was captivated because we provided resources for him to be able to imagine in a broader way what his story might become. So I, as for inspiration and imagination, providing those resources that will fill the intellect and give food for thought. The third area is what I'm going to call F. It's L. It's L for love and liberty, I for inspiration and imagination, and F is for fun and feasting. And we really are hobbits in our family. We love to eat a lot, and that's why we have to exercise a lot. But we just feel like because a verbal environment is a place where you can really nurture and talk about ideas and shape a vision for creativity, we decided that we would have and I wrote a book about it called The Life-Giving Table, that we would create every night. We had these routines all through our lives. There was never a moment almost in our whole lives together that there wasn't music wafting through the house. It might be instrumental, it might be Celtic, it might be opera, it might be contemporary music, it might be whatever. We would attach our loyalty to different artists. And so we had music. And when we come to the table every night, we lit candles. No matter if we had just a little piece of cracker or oatmeal, or if we had Chateaubriand, we lit candles, we put on music, we set the table, and we kind of set it as a stage for where we could entertain thought and ideas and discuss great ideas. And so we saw life and creativity as a way to be inspired by the sharing of what we've been reading, the listening to the music of each other, the strumming of instruments around our community of table. Our kids had all sorts of resources that they would then bring the product to the table at night. We had colored pencils, and we had pictures of art, and we had puzzles, and we had all sorts of creative tools for them to play with during the day, book baskets all over the house. And so our table became a place of sharing and saying, that's amazing, or that's beautiful, or I love that artwork, I love that piece of music, I love what you're thinking, I love that poem. And so our table became a place every night to celebrate that. And my daughter Sarah is just a magnificent writer. And so people have been influenced a lot by her own thoughts and theology. And so someone came to her one time and they said, Sarah, why do all four of you believe in God? And she didn't hesitate. She just thought for a second, and she said, well, it's because of the French toast with hot maple syrup and salted buttered pecans. She said, I think that's why we believe in God. And so someone said, what do you mean? And they said, well, basically our kids have all said that because we believe that God was the God who has of music, and the God who made chili peppers for Mexican food, and the God who made puppy dogs to cuddle, and the dog who made hot maple syrup and pecans on French toast to taste, that God was engaged deeply in our lives. And the table is where we celebrated him. And the rituals and routines were the places where we imprinted with our children the idea of his being beyond our imagination, in his goodness and in his color and in his creativity. And finally, I just want to talk about what it means to engage and to enjoy. And we would give our children opportunities to observe great people. We had, one of our children came up with the idea that we should save and save and save our money, and then go to London to see C.S. Lewis. In Westminster Abbey, they have these placards and these statues and these memoriams to all the different artists, the officers, the kings and queens, the people who accomplished great things over the history of England. And so we heard that C.S. Lewis, from one of our friends, said C.S. Lewis is going to have his stone placed there in memory of all of the creative stories that he wrote and told. And so we went to this several day conference, and we got to be at the place in Westminster Abbey where they had the music, and they presented the stone and talked about his investment in all of these ideas. And during that time, Joel, who we had sent him to Berklee College of Music, we had affirmed his music. We had told him as a little boy when he said, I want to create some kind of music when I get older. And I used to say to him, Joel, in Scripture, there was the Levites were those who were set aside as God's chosen ones to sing songs and to play instruments, to glorify God their whole time. A Levite was somebody who made the most beautiful music that would touch their hearts and sing their stories and their history. And so I always told him, I wonder if you'll be a Levite in your generation. And so he became a composer. Well, it just happened that while we were there, Joel said, Mom, I've got a surprise for you. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. So he took, I believe it was Sarah and me at the time, we were both there with him, and he dragged us across the city, running through the subways and catching buses and then walking. And then there he presented us. He said, it's going to be here at Prince Albert Hall, which is a huge auditorium. And we went inside, and Joel had found a performance of the Requiem. And it was truly one of the most beautiful pieces, a work of art in music that I'd ever heard. And he said, this is the imagination of what you exposed us to stretch our minds and hearts and to enliven our love for music. So I wanted to bring you to one of the most wonderful concerts I could imagine ever attending. And so our children, we become creators because God is creative and He is the creator. And we observe His creation and we live into it. We make time for it and we value it. And then we spend our days talking about it throughout the mundane moments of the days. And we engage in the sunrises, the sunsets, the stars, the snowflakes, the spring flowers, the summer winds. And then when the food that our souls eat, so to speak, the food for our souls are the beauty, the art, the goodness, the love, the music, the creation. It's what we plant grows. What we invest in, we become. And so it was a worthy goal to see our home as a laboratory of life in bringing the vast creativity and goodness and transcendence of God to bear in a realistic way. And so I hope that some of what I shared is encouraging to you, but I would just encourage you not just to think of becoming an artist in just one medium, whether it's as a chef or as a painter or as a musician or as an author. But I would encourage you to think of where you live as the place where you can open up the vast reality and creativity that is dormant inside of people, that is just waiting to come out. It's been one of the privileges of our lives to see to see the Spirit of God imparting through our children this beauty and goodness that we could taste and imagine and feel and have grown to appreciate more every day of our lives. Well, I hope that this is encouraged, and I hope that we will actually get to be face to face sometime and see one another. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.